The United Nations commemorates International Equal Pay Day in South Africa, despite the fact that it is law to provide equal pay for equal work. The gender pay gap is real, with women earning less compared with men doing the same job. Now, Dr. Janet Viljoen, Academic Planning and Development Practitioner at Boston City Campus, joins us for more. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Now, International Equal Pay Day is an important day on the gender calendar. Can you provide some insights into this day?
Great. Thank you for having me today. It's great to be with you. Yes, as you said quite rightly, the United Nations commemorates International Equal Pay Day on the 18th of September, so today. And it draws attention to the many efforts that are continually being made toward the achievement of equal pay for work of equal value as an important milestone for human rights and for gender equality. For instance, let me give you some what I might term frightening facts. Women are globally concentrated in lower paid, lower skill work with greater job insecurity and underrepresented in decision-making roles. And women carry out at least 2.5 times more unpaid household and care work than men do. So across all regions of the globe, the gender pay gap is said to be around about 23%, obviously more in some areas and less in others. And the problem is that progress in closing this gap has been so slow. And you might wonder why in 2022 we need to be talking about this particular issue, but we certainly do.
Are we finding that in more developed countries that gap is closed even more as opposed to rather less developed countries?
That's an interesting one. The World Economic Forum actually curates something called the Global Gender Gap Index. And according to that report, which comes out annually, you are quite right. The top countries in terms of those countries who have successfully narrowed their gender pay gaps quite substantially are in fact our Scandinavian friends up in the north. Iceland is the only economy who has closed more than 90% of its gender pay gap. But as you note, there's still some pay gap left there. But what's really nice to note is that we have sub-Saharan countries in the top 10 of those countries who have managed to narrow their gender pay gaps quite significantly. In fact, Namibia is ranked 8th for having closed 80.7% of its gender pay gap, which is fantastic.
Absolutely fantastic. I mean, achieving equal pay is an important milestone for human rights and socioeconomic development. And in order to decrease the risk of women and their families falling or remaining in poverty, how are we as South Africa doing?
Yeah, not so well, to put it in a nutshell. In South Africa, the median gender pay gap is between 23 and 35%, with reports indicating that it goes up as high as 49% in some instances, which means, in practice, that South African women actually have to work an extra 180 days in order to earn the equivalent salary for the same work as a male counterpart might get. I mean, that's half a year. When it comes to leadership, for example, which is another indicator of gender gaps, the PwC Executive Directors Report shows that the gender pay gap is in fact most significant for your large cap companies, which is where there's in the upper regions of where the pay gap is sitting at 49%. So there's quite a long way for South Africa to go.
Most certainly. I mean, gender gaps in the workforce are driven and affected by many factors, with women historically facing a motherhood penalty. Can you provide some insight into this?
So, yeah, there are many factors that affect the gender gaps in the workplace, which do include long-standing barriers, socio-economic factors, and technological transformation. And as we've seen over the past decades, more women have, and it's a very, very good thing, have been moving into paid work globally and increasingly into leadership positions. Yet, despite this, globally, societal expectations, sometimes employer policies, the legal environment, and the availability of care for children continues to play a role in what women are choosing to do in terms of their education and their career tracks. And as I mentioned earlier, women also perform an unequal share of family and household tasks, which can take time away from their jobs or their career aspirations and leave them with fewer opportunities for advancement in that respect. So the International Labour Organization is very clear that men also have interruptions to their work lives. That is not in question, but that there is a much higher penalty for women, and particularly, and this is quite scary, I think, women with children are likely to be paid less than men, but also less than women without children, which I think is a challenge we need to take up quite seriously.
Most certainly, because, so these social and cultural norms obviously play a significant role in perpetuating these gender gaps. How can these issues then be addressed?
As I've mentioned during the course of this conversation, this is a challenge that needs to be taken up. And I think what's really great is that we can take it up from the grassroots, as it were. And that is that educational institutions, be they primary, secondary, or tertiary, can play a key role in encouraging equal participation by sort of ending that traditional male-dominated subject idea. So your STEM subjects, your science, your technology, your engineering, and your mathematics were traditionally seen as male-dominated fields, and we can change that by encouraging our girl children and our young adults to enter those fields, and thus sort of closing the gender gap in that way. Another thing that we can do to take up this challenge is to create household role models, both men and women, that challenge traditional gender stereotypes in terms of the workplace. And this can work towards establishing gender parity. And the closer we get to gender parity, the closer we'll get to closing the gender pay gap, which is important. So it's crucial we continue to have days like today, which will raise awareness of these issues, and that we continue to be very aware of it in our society, so that we in ourselves can, at the grassroots level, actually make an impact.
Lastly, Dr. Viljoen, one of the biggest steps towards resolving the gender pay gap is equal gender representation within senior positions. Are we making any strides in this, especially as South Africans?
I think it's important to note that strides are being made, and I think even if the progress is slow, we mustn't be upset or kind of despondent by the progress. But the PwC Director's Report, which is released annually, shows that only 15% of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, the JSE executive population, is female.
Sure.
Now, and of those, your sure is so well placed. Of those, only 7 of the top JSE listed companies are led by female CEOs. Wouldn't it be wonderful to see that change?
Most certainly. We should be making strides, like you say, but it takes days like this where awareness is brought up and people are aware of what it is that we need to do in order to close these gaps. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. Thank you so much for that input. That is Dr. Janet Viljoen, who's the Academic Planning and Development Practitioner at Boston City Campus.